Kim, yesterday afternoon, I was out in my bee yard again. Here it is, early July, hot days, grass needs cutting. And I was struck by something that I've noticed hundreds of times through the decades. There's a lot of life in my bee yard besides bees. It's like a big box shopping store back there.
Yeah, there's and the way things have been going this summer, when I'm in the bee yard, I've got a little more time than I normally have had over the last couple decades, it seems. And I'm able to look around. I'm standing there looking at the ground. I'm watching what's crawling over my foot, what's crawling up the side of the hive, all the little things. You know, we've talked about the big things before, bears and skunks and raccoons and those sorts of things. But you're right. There's a city in our bee yard.
Well, I got more questions than I have answers, as usual. But let's chat about it for a while.
All right.
Hi, I'm Jim too.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
And we're coming to you from Honeybee Obscura, where today we want to talk about all the things in our bee yards that are not bees.
Well, at least most of them. I don't think I know all of them.
You are listening to Honeybee Obscura, brought to you by Growing Planet Media, the folks behind Beekeeping Today podcast. Each week on Honeybee Obscura, hosts Kim Flatham and Jim too explore the complexities, the beauty, the fun, and the challenges of managing honeybees in today's world. Get ready for an engaging discussion to delight and inform all beekeepers. If you're a long-timer or just starting out, sit back and enjoy the next several minutes as Kim and Jim explore all things honeybees.
You see, the thing that's really on my mind that made it stand out was a green bottle fly, a common blowfly. Why are they all around the entrance of my colony? The colony isn't weak. There's no open diseased brood. There's no decaying plant life, animal life. So why is that fly nosing around? Then it's very, very flighty. So I wanted to take a picture of it and then see if I could use some computer program and in a way cheat and let it ID the fly instead of me trying to do it the old-fashioned way. And that fly would have no part of that. You get inside of 2 feet of that fly with a camera and it's gone. So these flies are always sitting around, and there's different species of them. And I only use that as one example. So what attracts this outside animal life to my beehive?
I think off the top of my head, now you got me thinking about it, the inside of a beehive is warm, it's dry, there's all kinds of food in there, depending on what your diet is. If you like dead bees, there's probably 2 or 3 of those on the bottom board or on the front entrance. If you like live adult bees, there's millions of those. And if you like eating small children, there's a lot of those in there too. Plus honey and pollen. So, you know, the inside of a beehive is, what did you use? One of those superstores. That's just inside. Outside are all the customers.
And you know, the way that we've got our hive set up, if the bees were in a tree and they were 6, 7, 8 feet off the ground coming out of a knothole or a crack, they physically have enough aerodynamics to carry out, for instance, one of their fallen comrades, which is basically the same body weight as the house cleaning bee. So when that bee comes out and takes flight, she goes into a hard nosedive, like a heavily laden plane trying to take off a short runway, and she can just barely get airborne and take off carrying that full load. So what happens? We put our beehives either close to the ground or sometimes on the ground, and they can't get off the ground. So where I'm going with this is a compost pile of dead bees accumulates in front of our hive because the bees physically can't take flight to clean. And then everything comes to that. Yellow jackets, all kind of degraders, other life. They don't do any harm that I know of, do they? But they're drawn to what? I guess the odor of decaying animal life, these degraders that show up?
Well, when that's your diet, dead things, that's probably given off, here's supper for the next 3 months. signal. And if I'm eating dead bees for a living, I'm going to stick around there.
Yep.
And there's a lot of things that eat dead bees for a living.
I don't really mind them there, but the point I want to make is, and we keep going back to it, this is like a community. We, you and I, as beekeepers, see my and your bee yard as a bee yard. We even name it a bee yard. But would a better life be, and this is just me being funny now, Kim, would a better name for our bee yard be a life yard? Because it's teeming with life. And if I don't want to go into it because I am profoundly not qualified, but if we looked inside the hive and went down at the small level at what we can't see, to the macro vision, I'm not talking micro, but macro, there's even more creepy crawly things that are in and around the beehive. Is this thing like a beaver dam? Is a bee yard in any way like a beaver dam where a beaver comes in, picks out a small stream, puts the dam across it, builds the dam, works on the dam, maintains the dam, finally gets a pond behind it, and then within 2 years there's fish and frogs and aquatic life? Is a beehive anything like that beaver dam environment?
That's an interesting way to look at it. I've never thought about it like that, but I think you're onto something there. And here's another thing. Now that you got me thinking here about 30 years of keeping bees and not paying close attention, but a little bit of attention. The creatures that you see in the bee yard when you're standing there looking at a frame and you look down at your foot and there's things moving, change over the course of the season. In the spring, you'll have these, and in midsummer, you'll have these, and come fall, you'll have these too. And some of them last all year, and some of them are there, and then are gone. Now that you got me thinking about it.
Well, now you got me thinking. Before you get on with that, that's really interesting that the degraders, if that's what they are, the composters, the hive invaders, they seasonally change as the dynamics of the hive changes, as the dynamics of either the cavity or the food supply changes. Good point, Kim.
The food supply, that's and you're talking about those yellow jackets, for instance, that are carrying away dead bees. Early in the spring, those yellow jackets, if they find one bee, that's going to last them a couple of days. By mid-July, one bee is going to maybe get back to their nest before it gets eaten, but certainly will be eaten the minute that yellow jacket walks into the nest, because the demand for food back home has multiplied many-fold. So that yellow jacket is going to tell her nestmates, I got a whole hive full of this stuff.
Yeah.
Follow me.
I'm trying to follow you right now, but this is a great concept. You've kind of taken my topic and made a better topic of it. So the yellow jackets, in this case, the yellow jackets' needs are going to change because both her population dynamics and her nest needs are changing. So we're not surprised to see that. In the spring of the year, you see yellow jacket queens, and then over time, you begin to see more and more worker yellow jackets, and then by July and August, the yellow jackets are in full swing back there, eating those dead bees. Kim, I can't tell that yellow jackets really do anything harmful other than clean things up. I think if there's a bee hive that's run down, weak, diseased, been robbed, hanging on by a prayer, I think the yellow jackets could be part and parcel into finishing that colony. But I can't say that the yellow jackets are the reason that colony got in that shape. So I think a lot of these uninvited visitors are opportunists who are just looking for a food supply anywhere, on a farm, around your garbage can, by my beehives, or wherever, and that we're making it sound like that these are special visitors because they preferentially chose beehives. I think they just probably chose a food supply, and this happened to be it.
It's in the bigger world, I think you got it right on the head there. I think that's exactly right. It's eat or be eaten. here's another one. I still use telescoping outer covers. You ever take off a telescoping outer cover and have enough ants covering the inner cover?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I stood there, I looked at that, and I think these animal species, these insect species, are living amicably. I mean, the ants have agreed to live on the inner cover, and the bees have agreed to live beneath the inner cover, and they're both happy until I show up, the perpetual intruder, and mix up the ant nests and scatter them everywhere. I don't want them there. I don't guess the bees cared. They didn't make an effort to get them out. Yes, I have seen that 1,000 times. I have seen that as recently as yesterday when I opened some empty equipment, and there was a carpenter ant nest in there. It wasn't a big one, and I thought, you can just stay here, because I realized I'm not exactly sure what carpenter ants eat, but I'm hoping that if given the opportunity, they would eat wax moths. So at least it's a different pest. So instead of wax moths, I've got a case of carpenter ants in one of my empty hives back there in my city community, in my bee yard.
You can ratchet it up just a notch. The same seasonal pattern kind of follows a lot of the things that you're going to see in your bee yard. Springtime is when they have litters and when they lay eggs and when they start building their population. Summer is when their population is steadying out, and fall, the population begins to decrease. So if I'm thinking, I'll mention ants, but I'm also thinking like springtails and spiders and things. In the spring, you don't have many because there aren't many. In the summer, you have about as many as you're going to have. And by fall, they're probably gone. Or they have expanded to the point where they own the hive and you don't anymore.
Yep. That's exactly right. They took it over. Give me a second to think about that, because you touched a nerve when you said springtails. Let's hear from our sponsor, and I want to talk about that.
At Better Bee, we know you have many options for where you choose to get your wooden hive boxes and frames. We work closely with our sister company, Humble Abodes, in Maine, to bring you high-quality woodenware featuring tight-fit assembly available in a variety of great options to meet your needs. So whether you choose select, commercial, or budget-grade boxes or frames, you can count on quality milling of locally sourced eastern white pine. Shop all woodenware at betterbee.com.
My daughter always feels like that she's under siege. There's something in her house trying to get her. There's ants. There's the occasional spider. Well, she began to call me, Kim, telling me she was having a springtail invasion in one of her lower humid bathrooms. I've never really heard of such. When I was an entomologist in training, springtails was the kind of thing that you needed to get to satisfy the requirements for an insect collection. But otherwise, it was just this tiny little critter, kind of like a thrips. You had to put it on a microscope slide or in an alcohol bottle to even see it. And here my daughter is saying that she's got a little springtail invasion in the shower pan in her lower bathroom. So and since I'm a beekeeper and an entomologist, sure, you would just be able to tell me everything in the world about these columbella. No, I knew almost nothing. I mean, other than the fact that I needed them all those years ago for my insect collection. But here's where I'm going, Kim. I thought, you don't suppose, and of course the web knows everything. I asked, do springtails ever get in beehives? Oh, yes. The answers came back immediately. But it all came back anecdotal information from beekeepers, that they were finding all these tiny, tiny, half-size, flea-looking critters that were spring-loaded, flying all over the place, jumping around, popping like miniature life inside the beehive. So where I wanted to go was, how in the world did these animals in the grouping columbella, tiny that they are, how did they get up in the detritus on the bottom board of that beehive and establish a population there? So that was the thing, that and the blowflies and the earwigs and the ants There's a lot of interest in beehives from things other than bees. And I don't know what the relationship is. Is that relationship always bad? Is that relationship sometimes bad? Or is it actually good for the bees, whatever's there? I have no idea. I'm sure it depends on the critter you're talking about. But yes, beekeepers, add this to your list of things you can have in your beehive. You can have macroscopic springtails in the grouping Columbella. That can be in your beehive, seemingly doing absolutely nothing wrong other than eating and degrading what's left in the bottom board droppings there.
Way back in Wisconsin days, I had one of the hives that we had there at the bee lab had springtails, and I had no concept of what a springtail. I don't think I'd ever seen one. Knew what of it, didn't know anything about it. And the guy I was with, he took the cover off and he says, "Now watch this." And he very carefully took the cover off. It was an overlapping cover, very carefully, very quietly. And he said, "Okay, you ready for this?" And he got it loose all the way around, and he put a hand on both sides, and he lifted that thing up above his head in that fast. And 100 springtails that were sitting on the inner cover made the inner cover look like a pan of popcorn popping.
Oh, wow. I've never heard that story.
And they were just going up and up and up, and some of them were falling down into the hive. Some of them were jumping outside the edge, and they're just hopping. And he said, "Okay, give it a minute. And so we're standing there, and they're hopping, and they're less hopping, and they're not hopping. And they go back to normal, even with the cover off. That time. I don't know if that's normal behavior or not. And you just mentioned springtails on the bottom board because they're scavengers. What they're looking for in that beehive is the dead bees, that kind of thing. But up on the inner cover, and bam, it was just like popcorn.
I've never seen that. But my story from long, long ago, when I was keeping bees in South Alabama, was European earwigs. They were just in such great numbers as to be annoying. I don't want to offend anybody who's producing honey, but one of the main things that my honey filter would catch would be those earwigs, because in entomology terms, they're dorsolaterally flattened. So they can lay inside that cell perfectly flattened and hold on and really do a nice job. They don't shake out, fall out. So about 5 years ago, for the first time ever, I began to see earwigs in my beehives. I think they're also detritus feeders, but I don't know. There's one lone Russian paper. I think I've got this out of one of the main bee books. It's not my information. That speculated that earwigs might be a secondary vector for European foul brood. But otherwise, they're just there. But people do not want earwigs in their honey, so you got to have a filter system to get that out, and the dead bees and the particles of wax. But I've got pictures. I made them back here in my beehive. So one of the things that somehow finds its way to my beehive city has been earwigs in the last few years. I'm not invaded like I was in Alabama. And Kim, then there's cockroaches. Good heavens, those things, once they take over, and those, I used to say it was just, in the warm, humid states that I lived in, but I've seen cockroaches on the inner covers and in the various devices on top of the hive, and they do like ants. They just seem to coexist there. And the only time I see them in the colony is when I disrupt things. I disrupt the status quo, and then they run down into the colonies there. As a new beekeeper, you'd think, oh, the bees will kill them. No, they won't. The cockroaches run around, bees run around, everybody's excited, a lot of confusion. All of a sudden, the hive is light inside. It was pitch black a minute ago. I guess in the bedlam, it's just a free-for-all. There's no time for those guys to really fight each other until they get their organization back. Help me out.
I'm going to go back a half a step to earwigs. My experience with earwigs is pretty minimal, but the people I know that have been dealing with them, find them in empty combs, flat on the bottom, hiding.
Yeah. Yep.
And the one experience I had with a highly infested, well, I think it was highly infested colony, the beekeeper went in, took the cover off, pulled up a frame, set the cover down on his hive stand. He banged the frame because there was a top side and a bottom side. Both sides of the comb, there was one side of the comb was up, one side of the comb was down. He banged it, and all of the earwigs fell out of the downside of that comb when he banged it on. And there was, I don't know, 75 or 100 of them, and it was kind of like the popcorn thing. So they're just hiding. From all I understand, they're just hiding. But cockroaches, I'm sure they're not eating dead live bees. What they're probably doing is warm, dry, safe.
Yep.
I found a home.
Well, my biggest complaint about the serious cockroach infestation was the excrement that they left. They can just be so messy. I've got my own problems with wax moths and everything else. Kim, we're out of time. I wanted to talk about fire ants, but I'm going to hold that. And maybe you and I can talk about ants, specifically fire ants, later on. But I've never really known if fire ants are good guys or bad guys. But when I was living in the South, I used to use those fire ants to torment. That's the only word to be used. Colonies that had empty equipment that had a wax moth infestation.
Oh.
I'm saving that. We're out of time. The point I was making, the thing I wanted to talk with you about for a few minutes was how many other animals live in my bee yard besides bees. And they're there all the time. They've always been there, but it's a bee yard. It's not a life yard. Bees are what I care about the most, so that's what I think about the most. But there's a lot of animals that really appreciate what the bees do to set up a home site for them.
Yep. I'm going to take this a step further. If you've been listening to this, next time you go out to your bee yard, before you start working your bees, look around. What's underneath? What's next to? What's on top of your beehive besides bees? Because you start paying attention, and if you're good at it, you make notes. And come next winter, you're going to go, holy cow, 3 pages of things that were in my bee yard.
Yep. It's kind of like bird watching in a beehive, except your other critter watching.
There you go.
I got to quit. I'm getting goofy.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to go back and have a look again. Enjoy talking to you, Kim. Till next time, buddy.
That's always good. Thanks.